Here's what you're missing over at patreon.com/Addressing Gettysburg.
You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this episode of Addressing Gettysburg. And today we have someone in studio who we've had on before, but he was on the phone. And he has decided to grace us with his presence today in studio. He signed our wall of fame. So if you ever come to the studio, you can see his signature there in case you think this is some kind of CGI where we're making it look like he's in the studio. No, he's actually here. And we're talking today about Alonzo Cushing. And the man in front of me is none other than Kent Masterson Brown. Hello, Kent.
Hello.
Welcome.
How are you?
It's great to meet you in person.
Well,
finally.
It's good meeting you.
I really enjoyed our last interview.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I told you this. I was nervous beforehand. Did I tell you this?
No.
No. Okay. I was nervous because I've never met you, obviously, before then. And I've only seen photographs of you. Mm-hmm. And you always have a bow tie.
Yes.
And in my mind, everybody who wears a bow tie is stuffy. and professorial. And so I was like, I better do my homework before this. And I went through the book and, the chapter that we were talking about for the interview, and I took notes and I formulated questions. And I was like, I don't want to disappoint. I don't want him to feel like I'm wasting his time.
Yeah.
And when we got on the phone before we actually started the show and we just started making small talk, I was like, what the hell was I thinking? Like you're just such a nice guy to talk to and very easy to talk to, great sense of humor. So I worried about nothing. But so today we're talking about Alonzo Cushing.
Yeah.
You wrote a book on him, and let's get into it. Why did you pick him to write the book about in the first place?
My interest in Alonzo Cushing began in 1963.
Oh, okay.
I was 14 years old, and we were on our way to pick up my great-great-aunt who had vacationed in, as she always did every year, in Buck Hill Falls, Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm. Where's that?
It's in northeastern.
Okay. Sounds like it.
Pennsylvania. And on our way up there, we stopped here. Then it was like a 3-day trip in a car. And to break the monotony of that, my mother agreed to stop. And so I asked her, I said, I've never seen the cyclorama, and I'd love to see it. So she said, well, let's go see it. So we went in, and then you had a kind of a docent there who had a flashlight.
Right.
And he would tell you the story of what's going on by using that flashlight.
Yes.
And he got to the guns at the angle, and he had the light on this figure falling beside his artillery piece. And he said, this young man's name is Alonzo Cushing, and he was a first lieutenant, graduate of West Point, came from Wisconsin. And he met his death wound defending that position against the Confederate attack. Anyway, I was so impressed with what I saw. And this is for everybody now who says, do you think we ought to go to a battlefield? Do you think we ought to take the kids there? I'm living proof that it is life-altering.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just that one showing. And then we walked out to the angle, my mother and I, and got to see where it actually took place. And from that moment on, I resolved, I want to see how much I can find about him. And when we got home, I began writing the Wisconsin Historical Society. I was 14 years old, and all these different repositories trying to find whatever they may have about this lad. And I remember even sitting down and talking to the dean of my law school. I went to law school at Washington and Lee University, and Roy Steinheimer was the dean, and he couldn't have cared less about history. But he asked me about, what are your interests and so forth, and I said, well, I just have a real interest in American history, and particularly the Civil War. And I then took out I had an envelope, and I took it all out, all the pages out, and I said, "These are what I have found on this one individual. I'm trying to collect information on to maybe write a work about him." And he thought that was kind of impressive, but really, does that really lend yourself here? I think was probably in his head, but nevertheless, I got in and was graduated. But all through those years, college as well as law school, I kept writing for more information. And once I got out of school, I had this corpus of stuff. I only had one letter, though, from Alonzo, and that was published in the Fredonia Censor, which was the newspaper in Fredonia, New York, where he grew up.
Right.
And it was a letter he wrote to his mother, and his mother took the letter and gave it to the publisher, and they put it in the newspaper. And it was one of maybe 2 or 3 letters that Cushing wrote to her that got published in the Fredonia Censor. And so that's all I had. And I kept thinking to myself, you really can't write a book unless you can make him talk. He's got to talk. Years passed, and I wrote a letter to the Chautauqua County Historical Society and ask them if they have any Cushing memorabilia or any Cushing ephemera or whatever. And I got a letter back that they really don't think they have anything except a trunk. And the trunk is in the attic. It's listed Cushing items. And they said in this letter, I don't know if Alonzo has anything related to him in that trunk, but you're welcome to take a look.
Okay.
And so that was on a Thursday. The next morning, I called my the senior lawyer I was working with then, and I said, I'm going to take a day off. And he says, "You're not feeling well?" I said, "Well, I don't know. It's not that as much as it is. I'm feeling really kind of good, and I need to go up and see something if you don't mind." And he said, "Yeah, go ahead." So I drove like a bat out of heck from Lexington to Fredonia, New York.
Oh, wow.
And I was sitting on the front porch of this it's an antebellum home. I don't know I can't recall quite the style of it, but it was something you would see in rural New York.
Right.
It's not the antebellum homes we're used to where I live, but anyway, it's a pre-Civil War house, and it had Historical Society on it, Chautauqua County, and I went in. It's about 9 o'clock in the morning, and I showed up and said, "I'm Kent Brown, the one who's been communicating with you, and I'm here to look at the trunk of Cushing things." And so she says, "Well, just follow me." And we went up the steps and got in the attic, and here's this big trunk. And it was a big trunk. And she says, "You're just welcome to look through all of it if you want." And so I began, and it was like one piece of paper at a time. This says nothing. And I found a letter from Mary Barker Cushing to Alonzo's mother, to Milton, her husband. Milton obviously was far away when she wrote this, and it was the results of a meeting she had with a psychic. Imagine now, and this is about 1840s.
Okay.
You don't know what's happening, 4,000 miles away. Where, imagine where Milton at the time was probably in Gallipolis, Ohio. And it was undated. And so, but it was the result of the psychic telling her that, "I think your husband is better, but he's very depressed." And I kept thinking, what's happening in this story? And I kept digging, and I found some newspapers, some of which had things in it about Alonzo, but they were small. But I put them aside so I could copy them. And it was around 3 p.m. I'd been at it for almost 6 hours. And I got down to the very bottom, and there was a business envelope. They don't use those anymore, but there's a big envelope. And I flipped it over to its front side, and in pencil it read, Alonzo's letters.
Ooh.
And I nearly dropped. I mean,
yeah, I mean, that's a great find.
And I opened it up, and here were 28 letters. Wow. They began when he was a second classman at West Point, equivalent to a junior, and then ran all the way through his life until 1 month before he died. So you have him at West Point, and you have him at war as well. And at war right before he's going to perish. And the letters were written to his mother, and they were also written to his brother Will. And this is William Cushing, who became a Navy commander, a recipient of a thanks from Congress for sinking the Confederate ram Albemarle. I mean, this guy was as much a hero as anybody, William Cushing. But he was kicked out of Annapolis. And these letters are to Will, trying to tell him to behave. We talked about this just a little while ago. Every family has one who is
you got to look out for
about anything.
Yeah.
He's ready to go out there and have a good time. He doesn't care. You know, and he resists all kinds of discipline. Just doesn't like it.
Yes.
And then when you have one like that, you have another. These are usually sons now, who is the one who's trying to keep the wayward one on track. Right. And he spends all of his time worrying about his brother.
Right. Yeah.
And that's Alonzo. And so he's writing these letters telling him, would you please behave? You know, you've only got so many months before you're out of that place. Can't you just behave? And anyway, it was just wonderful. And then he'd say, I'm looking forward to seeing you in camp. You're still coming, aren't you? Meaning, Will was just going to, I don't know what he's going to walk out of the academy.
Right.
Find his brother in some camp, along the Rappahannock or what. But they are really a funny pair.
Yeah.
And even though it's a limited number of letters between Alonzo and Will, still you get it. You get the relationship immediately of the two of them. But all the rest were to his mother. And Lon would, as people like to call him, Lon would talk a lot about, not necessarily where the Army's going. The uppers wouldn't like that.
Yeah.
but he would talk a lot about life in the camp. And I immediately began to say, Kent, we can make him talk.
Yeah.
We can now quote him. And on so many levels we can quote him. So anyway, I in a moment of joy, I took these downstairs to the front desk, and I said, gee, I'd like to be able to copy these. And of course, I get this response, we don't have a copier. And I thought, uh-oh.
That's a small town historical society for you.
And this is 77, I think.
Oh, okay. Well, they weren't as ubiquitous as they are now.
But they said if you go across the street to the what was the great company that
Kinko's?
No. This was the grape juice
Welsh's?
Welsh's.
Yeah.
Welsh's headquarters was across the street.
They'll let you use their copy?
Yeah.
Listen to the rest of this interview and dozens like it. Support the show and get early access to special episodes, early and discounted ticket sales, and more. The second lieutenant level and above gets access to all monthly Patreon episodes. So please go to patreon.com/addressinggettysburg, choose a tier, and join. And I thank you in advance.